Hello BookTube, it's Roz, and I haven't done a tag for a few weeks, and so I decided to do for Tag Tuesday the e-tag by Jim's books, reading and stuff. And because Jim particularly tagged booktubers whose names or channels begin with E, but then also he said that E is for everyone, so everyone is tagged. And yeah, it just appealed to me today as a straightforward one, I suppose. So prompt number 1, E is for elephant, the biggest book that you've read this year. The biggest book that I've finished so far this year is Adam Bede by George Eliot. So not a huge one. I don't know, it's probably like, 500 pages or something, and very enjoyable it was too. In relation to this first tag, for some reason, Jim also mentioned that E was for Ethiopia. And so I thought I would say that I particularly enjoyed Maaza Mengiste's Beneath the Lion's Gaze as a book from Ethiopia, and I'm meaning sometime this year to read her newer one, The Shadow King. And so I'm going to say that here so that if anyone out there thinks, oh, I also am intending to read The Shadow King and wants to offer to buddy read it with me, and that'll make sure that I actually read it at some point a bit later in the year, then go ahead. I also liked Cutting for Stone by Abraham Verghese. I think he's sort of Ethiopian origin and was born there, but he didn't really grow up there. But Cutting for Stone is set in Ethiopia, and yes, really interesting one about a doctor working in a sort of quite difficult circumstances. Very moving actually, and about women's health. Prompt number 2 is E is for English. The greatest English novelist, please, says Jim, in your opinion. Easy question then, obviously. No, I could make a case for George Eliot, and that would kind of make sense for the E-tag because, you know, he's for Eliot. But my heart tells me that I have to say Jane Austen. Jane Austen, I really think, is the greatest English novelist, in the sense she did so much to establish what a great English novel is. Plus, it's the very end of June when I'm recording this, and on the Tuesday that it's going to go out, and July is Jane Austen July, so has to be Jane. Prompt number 3. If English is not your first language, what was the first book you read in English? Or, if English is your first language, what was the first book you read in another language? Well, I had to think hard about this because I read lots of bits of books in like Latin or Greek or French or whatever, as when I was at school. But I think the first book that I read cover to cover in another language would have been a Maigret novel by Georges Simenon, the Belgian writer of detective fiction, and I can't actually remember which Maigret novel it was. And you know what? I couldn't do it now, sadly. I've let that slip away from me, the sort of standard of my French, which is really disappointing. And it's something I'm ashamed of myself for, I suppose. There we go. Prompt number 4 is E is for Elantris. Elantris? Let's get that right. Yeah. And that's the it's what is your favourite Brandon Sanderson novel? Now, I've never read anything by Brandon Sanderson, so I could have just skipped this prompt because Jim gave us permission to skip any that we didn't fancy. But I have a Brandon Sanderson enthusiast in the house in the shape of Alfred, so I asked him what was his favourite Brandon Sanderson novel, and he picked a novella. It's in this collection of Brandon Sanderson's sort of shorter fiction and shorter writing, Arcanum Unbounded, and it's called The Emperor's Soul, and it's about 100 pages, and he says that kind of epitomises for him what's good about Sanderson's writing, which did make me think that maybe I should read it. Do you think I should read it? He thinks I should read it. Tell me, Sanderson, other Sanderson fans out there, might I enjoy a Sanderson novella? Yeah, I might commit to it. Then, prompt number 5 E is for experimental. Have you read any experimental books? Now, this is one of those questions, isn't it? Because what is an experimental book or an experimental novel? But, what does that mean? Probably means lots of different things to lots of people. Bearing in mind there is Jane Austen July any minute now. Jane Austen's novels would have been experimental when she wrote them. I mean, John Mullan has written a tremendous book about a very accessible book of literary criticism about Jane Austen. It's called now, where are we? What Matters in Jane Austen. And he explains there how experimental aspects of her writing are. If you are looking for a non-fiction book to read for Jane Austen July and you haven't yet read John Mullan's What Matters in Jane Austen, read that one. That's my instruction to you. But I thought I should try and pick something that's sort of the more contemporary idea of an experimental novel, I suppose. So I'm going to say 3 Dreams in the Key of G by BookTube's own Marc Nash. And I'm particularly picking that as an opportunity to say that his new book comes out in July. And I'll put a link to one of the places where he mentions it, or one of the places you can buy it, because I really enjoyed 3 Dreams in the Key of G. So I've pre-ordered his new book. Stories We Tell Our Children, I think it's called. Yeah. Prompt number 6. E is for ebooks. Do you prefer physical books or ebooks, and why? Now, I've answered this question before, and the answer is I prefer physical books for all sorts of sensory reasons and reasons around being able to flip back and forth. There's all sorts of reasons for preferring a physical book, but I actually read more books as ebooks these days than physical books because of the overwhelming convenience factor of an ebook. Prompt number 7, E is for exploration. Name your favourite travel book. Now, again, this is a question I've kind of answered before, and I'm not going to name one of the more conventional travel books that I often would use in answer to this question, because this month in June, I read a book which I'm going to stretch a point and call a different sort of travel book, because, it was a book called Wayfinding, The Art and Science of How We Find and Lose Our Way. And it was by someone called Michael Bond, published in 2020. And that's what it is. It's a book about how we travel, as in how we find our way. Excellent book. The neuroscience of it, the skills involved, the observation, who's better at it, who's worse at it. Really interesting book. I strongly recommend it. It's definitely going to feature in my June's delights and discoveries. Prompt number 8, E is for Eleni. Do you have kids, grandkids, pets, or anything similar that begin with whose name begins with E? No, I don't. So that one I can skip. Prompt number 9, E is for elf. What's your favourite fantasy character? Now, I've given different answers to similar prompts in the past, but this week, my favourite fantasy creature is the scorpion men in the Epic of Gilgamesh, story from 4,000 years ago. And the scorpion men are great. They guard the entrance to the tunnel that the sun uses. What tunnel the sun uses, you ask, somewhat confused. Well, it's obvious, isn't it? You know how the sun, comes up in the morning and goes all the way over and goes down at sunset. Well, obviously there has to be a tunnel for the sun to rush along to get back to the other side to come up again in the morning. Yeah, now you think about it, logical, isn't it? And I love the way the scorpion men tell Gilgamesh, well, if you want to get to the other side of the world, the end of the world, you could do it, but you're going to have to run along this tunnel as fast as the sun does, because you've got from when the sun leaves it in the morning to when it re-enters it. And then if you don't get to the other end of the tunnel in time, you're going to be like, burnt to a cinder. Gilgamesh does it though. Brilliant stuff. Prompt number 10 is for extraterrestrial. Your favourite book about another world, or your favourite planet, real or fictitious. My favourite planet is definitely Earth. because we're so lucky that it's just right for life to exist on it. My favourite kind of science fiction-y recent sort of alternative world, I suppose, is that in N.K. Jemison's books, the Stone Sky, Obelisk Gate, that series, which I'm really enjoying. I've got the third one still to read. But I've decided that my most favourite, I suppose, is In Paradise Lost. The description of hell and heaven and the kind of like the space between them, and how the Lucifer moves between them and the archangels do. Yeah, that is my favourite. Definitely. Final prompt, E is for Exodus. Okay, the most interesting book you read about an Exodus. Now, Jim, when he was talking about this prompt, mentions the 1971 Bangladeshi Exodus, probably involving the greatest loss of life of any sort of movement like that certainly that, we know of in relatively recent times. And that reminded me of a book called The Golden Age, which was the debut novel of the Bangladeshi author Tahmima Anam, and it came out in 2007, and it's basically the story of Bangladesh's civil war that Exodus was kind of part of, told through a bit of a family saga, but that makes it sound a less good book than I think it is. So that's my go at the Jim's splendid E-tag. I've skipped B, C and D, but really enjoyed doing A, and I'm sure I will do another further down the line of the alphabet if he does more. And as he says, E is for everyone, so anyone who fancies doing this, consider yourselves tagged.